Lights, camera, action.
Hello, friends.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jon.
I'm Emily.
And this is Married to Movies. And today we are talking about Moneyball, a new film to us, which we thoroughly enjoyed. Mm-hmm. And we are having a guest in the studio today, so we're super excited about that. If you're familiar with Moneyball, you know that it's a sports movie, and you know if we cover sports movies, then we have Mr. Jeff Strickland in the studio. So we are welcoming him back into the studio later in this episode. We are going to fly through our parts. We're going to aim to keep it as brief as we can because the interview with Jeff was really good. It was a lot of fun, and we were really glad to have him back here with us. So yes. We're just going to keep the show rolling and going to let Emily take us away.
Okay. So Moneyball was released on September 19th of 2011. It was directed by Bennett Miller. It is starring Brad Pitt, Jonah Hill, Chris Pratt, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Karis Dorsey, Ken Medlock, Reed Diamond, and Robin Wright. It was distributed by Columbia Pictures and Sony Pictures. It has a runtime of 2 hours and 13 minutes. It's rated PG-13. Its budget was $47 million with a box office total of $110.2 million. So I'll just go ahead and dive into fun facts. I have quite a bit, so I'm going to try to talk fast. So first, I will need some help pronouncing this name. Okay. Is it Paul De Podesta? Is that how you say it? Or De Podesta?
Yeah, I'm not familiar. Like, I read it during my research as well, but I don't know the appropriate pronunciation. So I'm going to just say yes. Okay.
Well, he went to Harvard, but he played football and baseball there, and he was an athletic guy. And when Bennett Miller took over directing, which I'll explain more about that in a second, the De Podesta character was to be played by Jonah Hill, with his performance putting on like a little bit of a different take. But it didn't really portray, it wasn't based off of the actual guy's like personality. Okay. And yep. I should say this. I'm talking about Peter Brandt.
Yes, okay.
I probably should have led
I know
with
what you're
that.
talking about because this came up in my research as well. So Jonah Hill's character, Peter Brandt, was inspired by Paul De Podesta.
Yeah, I should have said that at the beginning.
Yeah. And so originally, Paul De Podesta was supposed to be a character in the film.
Correct.
But Paul felt that during the rewrites of the script that the character kind of ventured too far from who he really was, that it wasn't reflective of like who he was. So he requested that it be disconnected, like that his name no longer
wasn't
be
in there.
Associated.
Yes.
So they came up with Peter Brandt.
Right. And actually, he ended up praising Jonah Hill's performance in the movie after the fact, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yes.
So this next one is kind of like a 2 to 3 parter. Very interesting stuff that I was not expecting to find. So, Steven Soderbergh, who, if you don't know this, directed 3 Oceans movies with Brad Pitt. So they were pretty familiar with each other already. He was actually supposed to be the director before Bennett Miller took over. He had some pretty interesting ideas for the movie. With him involved, Brad Pitt agreed to play Billy Bean since he already knew him. And Steven cast Dimitri Martin as Paul De Podesta, who worked in Bean's front office. But after that, things kind of got weird. He wanted to make the movie a pseudo-documentary. So he wanted to mix real life with like a narrative film. And he cast the actual Scott Hatteberg and David Justice as themselves. And apparently he had the idea of an animated character, perhaps like an animated version of baseball writer Bill James to pop in to explain baseball, like terminology and like just like information to the audience. So this whole vision that Steven Soderbergh had spooked Sony executives, so they decided to just cancel the movie altogether. They put it, I don't know if you're familiar with the term turnaround or something like that in film.
Yeah.
But basically it's, I will probably butcher this, but I'm pretty sure it's where the movie is still like in works, I guess, or available for people to pick up, but Sony just didn't want to be part of it anymore after hearing all of these ideas. But ultimately it ended up working out, and they did end up continuing on with the film, but they did away with Steven Soderbergh, and that's when they hired Bennett Miller, and it became what we know it as now.
Yeah, so it became a point of contention between Sony and Soderbergh because obviously his ideas were very far out there.
Right.
The idea of blending a narrative film with a documentary was one that was kind of a far leap and maybe unnecessary, like unwarranted. It kind of almost started to fall into more like of a 60 for 60, like an ESPN film that had skits in it or something like that. And then the addition of having an animated character to like explain baseball feels somewhat like, I mean, it's completely out of place.
Right.
But it also, I feel like it's almost insulting towards the audience.
I would agree, yeah.
You know, like it's demeaning almost. Like, and granted, like I understand the premise of why he would want to do that. I get maybe the thought behind it, but it's completely unnecessary. So it became a point of contention between Soderbergh and Sony that their visions were just too far off, and Sony was pretty straightforward with him and said, this movie is going to be way too arty. We're not going to move forward with this. And so he left the project, and then they brought on David Miller. Was that his
Bennett
name?
Miller.
Bennett Miller. Yes. Okay.
All right. So moving on. When Chris Pratt auditioned for the role of Scott Hatterberg, he was told that he was too fat, basically.
Yes.
And so Chris decided to lose weight before the role was cast. And this is a quote from him. He said, "I'd check maybe once a week and I'd say, have they cast it yet? And I would just keep working out. Finally, I got in good enough shape that I took a picture of myself and sent it to my agent. And that is when he won the role."
Very nice. Well deserved.
Oh, I totally agree. I absolutely loved him in this movie.
Yes.
Next, in the film, Art Howe is depicted as against Billy Bean's ploys and just like all of his ideas, I guess, tactics. And a few team members from the Oakland A's, like in real life, said that this was not accurate. And Art himself was actually pretty upset about it. He talked openly about being upset with how he was portrayed in the movie. Yeah,
which I can understand. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the relationship and whatnot, and obviously screenwriters have to make a story interesting to create an uphill battle for the protagonist. You know, there has to be a struggle that the audience can relate with, or at least rally behind. So I get why these things happen sometimes. However, I mean, I was at the point of watching the movie and saying, yeah, it's time to fire Art. Mm-hmm. You know, like get him out because he's being openly insubordinate.
Right.
So anyways, again, I don't know the ins and outs of the relationship and what really happened and things like that, but yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. So Billy's ex-wife Sharon is in the movie, and the movie depicts Billy as just like a single guy, you know, but this actually wasn't true in real life, because Billy Bean was already remarried when all of this happened. And this was going to be the case in the movie. Catherine Morris even shot scenes as his second wife, Tara. But ultimately, all of those scenes were cut. And I didn't notice this, but when I was reading, I found that Brad Pitt's character is even wearing a wedding ring throughout the whole movie.
I did notice that, and I didn't know if it was one of those things where, like, it was just an unsaid, like, deeper thing for the character where he was, like, still attached to the relationship, so he kept wearing it or what. But I did pick up on that. And
then my last one is that all but 4 of the scouts in the movie were played by actual Major League Baseball scouts. Tom Gamboa is probably the best known as the Kansas City Royals first base coach, and he was attacked on the field by 2 fans during a game against the Chicago White Sox on September 19th of 2002. So this father and son were highly intoxicated and ran onto the field, tackled him, threw several punches, and then were finally ended up getting restrained by players and security both. And he ultimately ended up suffering like permanent hearing loss because of it. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So I'm assuming he was probably the older gentleman who was wearing the hearing aids in the film?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. But also very cool that they used real scouts.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Very nice.
That is all I've got.
Okay. Well, I'm going to fly through mine, really just hitting the highlights. So, again, this movie is inspired by true events, which took place during 2002. So Sony acquired the rights to do this film back in 2004. So only 2 years after this all took place, which is pretty incredible, honestly.
Yeah.
And a script started being written very shortly after they acquired the rights. Fast forward 4 years to 2008, and the script had been written and it was already undergoing rewrites. And at this point, they did not have a director attached to it. But even before they got Soderbergh attached to the film in 2009, the one who had done the Ocean's movies with Brad Pitt and was the connection that got Brad on, even before Soderbergh was attached to the film, Brad Pitt was already being courted to play Billy Bean. So I thought that was super cool. I love when people have actors in mind as they're working on things.
Yeah.
I guess most of the time. Mostly because I feel like the inspiration that takes place for writing the script, you're able to write maybe more specifically. Like I feel like sometimes it enhances creative juices. I also think that sometimes it can be restrictive. But anyways, this is obviously a case that it worked out. So anyways, I thought that was very cool. Gonna skip all of Soderbergh's stuff because we covered all of that. And then we talked about Bennett Miller taking over, Jonah Hill replacing Dimitri Martin, the creation of Peter Brand. Sorry, I'm just kind of talking out loud as I'm going through my notes here. Okay, so at this point, we are past 2009. We're basically in 2010. December of 2009 is when Jonah Hill was brought on, and they kind of created the Peter Brand character. At this point, Aaron Sorkin is brought onto the project. So he is actually not the one who wrote the script for this film. He helped rewrite the script. So, I mean, he did write the script, but he's not solely responsible. A gentleman named, his last name is Zillion. Did I write his first name somewhere? I guess not. Okay. I thought I did. Is it Zillion is the guy's last name. He's the one who was hired to write the script back in 2008 when rewrites were going on. And then he brought on Aaron Sorkin a year later to help him rewrite. So anyways, we talked about Robin Wright, Billy Bean's real life how he was remarried. Okay. So in your notes, what did you say the budget of the film was? Do you recall?
47 million.
Yes. This was not the original budget number. I could not find a real number, but I saw that they underwent, I should say, extensive budget cuts.
Yes. It was originally 50.
Okay, so
I think
that's actually not that extensive. That's only $3 million.
at least that's what I think. I could be wrong, but I did see that one of the cuts was that Brad Pitt agreed to take a pay cut for it.
Yes, well, that's what I was going to mention, that the pay cuts for the film ended up causing Brad Pitt to take a pay cut, but like he wanted to stay on the film.
Okay. I feel like actually now that I'm thinking about it, that number's wrong that I just said.
That's okay. Okay, so this gets brought up later in the interview with Jeff, but I'll mention it here. The budget did not allow for filming at many different ballparks. So they actually resorted to filming at only a couple locations, primarily the Dodgers Stadium, which they dressed up as many, many different ballparks. They did film some scenes at the Oakland Coliseum, so we actually did not mention that with Jeff. But they did do some scenes at the actual Oakland A's Coliseum, and they also filmed some scenes at Blair Field, which is a baseball park stadium. I don't know. It kind of didn't look like a stadium, but more of a park. Anyways, they filmed some scenes there, but it was primarily at the Dodgers Stadium. So in the filming of all those scenes, they used 700 background extras for the crowds.
Wow.
Yes. I don't know, as far as numbers go for like big scenes and whatnot, but that seems like a lot of extras. So
See, I was going to say, well, I guess in terms of extras, yes, that is a lot of extras. I was just going to say, I feel like that's not very many for like a baseball game. You know what I mean? Like just thinking about how big the stadiums are and how many seats they have, but they probably just were able to maneuver the shots to where it looked like it was packed, even if it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people.
Okay. And then that's basically all that I have, at least all the stuff that's important. One thing that I did appreciate is that when they set out to do this film, after the many rewrites and director changes and everything, once they were like settled and in production and so on, they wanted to really make the movie feel authentic. So there were a number of baseball players that were brought on who portrayed themselves, but also just something as simple as like the flag being opened up during the ceremony before one of the games, as well as the Star Spangled Banner. Those were all inclusions that were very intentional to try and give you that feel, like that grand feel of going to like a baseball game. Just how it feels inherently American. It's America's sport, but also like there's just something super special about that. Those were all very intentional choices by Bennett, Miller, and team, and I'm glad that they included them. So that was just something that they made note of that I thought was interesting. And that is really all I have left. Although I thought I had one more thing, but maybe not. Oh, yes, I did. I forgot to mention, how I was talking about the whole Soderbergh-Sony tension and disagreeing on everything. So it all came to a head when Sony basically told him, like, hey, we're not doing this. Like, unless you change, like, we're not moving forward with this. It all came to a head 5 days before they were supposed to begin production.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't know like the intimate details of what happened there, but that's very, very close to filming. It almost makes me wonder if Sony was waiting to like put him in a position where they're saying like, hey, you better change because like you're just close enough where you can almost taste it. We're about to start production on this film. So, you know, you've invested a lot of time. You should really just change it and stay on. Maybe not. I mean, obviously they were willing to cancel the film over it. So I guess that might not be true, but that was at least a thought that ran through my mind, and thought it was kind of crazy that it was so close.
Well, I'm glad that they had the nerve to do it, because I don't think I would have enjoyed it nearly as much.
No, I wouldn't have either. I can't say that I'm surprised, especially after talking with Jeff. It just seems like the book itself kind of lends itself to that
open for interpretation, I guess, of like how to.
Well, I mean, it's according to Jeff, it's very stats. You know,
right.
It's just dry. It's not like there's not a story there. So a documentary makes a lot of sense. But, you know, for a movie, a movie's not a documentary. So, anywho, I'm glad that it did not work out in Soderbergh's favor.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, well, let's keep this bus rolling. How would you scale, or how would you rate this movie on a scale of 1 to 100?
I think I'm gonna give it a 90. I'm in like a range that I'm struggling to decide between 91 and 93. I think.
Okay.
I thought it was very well done, and it kept me engaged despite being a longer movie.
Yes.
And I like watching sports, but baseball is not one that like I'm super into. Granted, there's not a lot of actual baseball played in this movie. It's more about like the behind the scenes stuff. But I just found myself really captivated like the whole entire time. Yes,
I would agree 100%. I'm going to go ahead and give it a rating of 91. Just because I'm between 90 and 92, so I'm just going to split it right down the middle, give it a 91. But I agree with everything you said. The movie is, I feel like, expertly done. Like, it's just, it feels very refined. It feels concise. It feels like there's a lot of heart, despite it being just a guy deciding how to run a baseball team with a very minimal budget. You know? I mean, there's a lot of story threads that work together to get you to rally behind Billy Beane and get you to root for him. But at the end of the day, like, this should not be a movie when you really think about like everything that's going on. But it's a great movie. It's a phenomenal movie, and there's really not much at stake, so to speak.
Right.
You know, I mean there is, but I don't know. I guess all I'm getting at is that we're just watching a guy do his job, and it's not anything super crazy other than just, hey, you're going to play this guy tonight. But it's so engaging and so fun and so authentic and sincere, and it's acted so well, written so well. It's comedic when it needs to be. You know, it's funny. The comedic timing of it is perfect, and very well acted by Jonah Hill. And this movie totally launched him into his more dramatic roles that he's taken on, which I can wholeheartedly appreciate because he did a phenomenal job in this movie. I always love Brad Pitt. He's very enjoyable to watch, and he's a very enjoyable character to follow through this whole film.
Yeah.
I love that he feels so much pressure that he can't watch the games. I mean, I hate for somebody to be in kind of that state of mind, but it is a really interesting character dynamic to see play out throughout the course of the film. And I love the friendship that he has with Peter in the movie. It's fantastic. And I feel like Brad just does an excellent job keeping the movie moving, if that makes sense. Like, I just feel like I'm along with him for the ride, for the whole movie. Just like, all right, what are we doing next, Billy? And he's just doing his thing, and I'm very engaged watching him. But yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add other than that.
Yeah, I would add more, but we should probably keep moving.
Yeah. Well, all right. With
We
that,
cover, just because we cover a lot
we do.
of favorite scenes and a lot of what you just said too, like
Yeah.
in our interview with Jeff. So
Yeah, we do. We cover a lot of stuff, and it is an excellent interview. We hope you guys enjoy. Thank you for listening up to this point, and here is our interview with Jeff, and come back for our plug for next week at the end of this podcast. All right. Well, we are talking about Moneyball today, which is, as we know, a baseball movie, a sports movie, and we have our local sports expert back on the podcast. Third time around. So join us in welcoming Jeff back into the studio.
Oh man, it's so good to be here. Am I the only third time? Has Jordan made it third time?
Jordan has made
Jordan,
it 3 times.
Well,
and
we'll allow
then
that, I suppose.
my brother Josh as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. But I'll take. I don't know if sports movie expert is quite on the resume, but I like to think it is.
We're gonna give it to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
That's
think
great.
you're the most qualified out of
everybody we
Everybody.
know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, as long as there's some other qualifiers to that statement, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think just that you have probably more baseball movies than I own actual movies is probably the only qualifier we need.
I do. I mean, specifically baseball movies, I love so much. So
Yes.
yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, this was our first time ever watching Moneyball.
That's crazy.
And we loved it.
Okay,
It was
good,
so
good.
good.
I was actually
Yeah.
going to ask you almost before, but I was
Yeah.
like, no, I'll wait till we start to be like, okay, did you guys like it?
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
great.
Yeah.
We I could watch it again tonight.
Yeah.
And it would be just as good. It wouldn't feel like too soon or anything. Like, it was just a really well done movie. And I know, like, we were kind of talking a little bit before we started recording. It's just, like you said, a calm, enjoyable, like, it wasn't too intense, but it was a good story.
Yeah. It's hard to have a movie, I think, like this that has that sort of like depth and quality, but it's pretty lighthearted and
Right.
heartwarming and fun. Like, I feel like usually you are like really well done movies are typically pretty like intense, or they take a
Yes.
lot out of you.
Yep.
Movies that are maybe a little bit lighthearted, just fun, enjoyable, sometimes they're just not that well done.
Yes.
This movie, I really do think, is one of the rare times where it's like, I think they kind of nailed both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree 100%.
Yeah. So I'm in the same boat. This is obviously not my favorite baseball movie. Sandlot, that we did the last
Yes.
time, is my favorite
Yes.
baseball movie, but this is easily on my like top 2, 3, 4 baseball movies of all time.
Really? Okay. So, top 5 is Field of Dreams in there?
Field of Dreams is probably 1 or 2 with Sandlot.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What are some of your others that are in there?
So I love The Natural. I think
Okay.
The Natural
Yeah,
is
yeah.
just a classic baseball movie. I love 8 Men Out, so both of those are pretty old movies.
I don't think I've seen
not
8 Men
either
Out.
of them.
Yeah, 8 Men Out is the story of the Chicago Black Sox. So the shoeless Joe Jackson. It's actually the story that leads to Field of Dreams, in the sense like the Field of Dreams, one of the main characters is Shoeless Joe.
Yeah.
He's kicked out of baseball for gambling on baseball, but most people think
Yeah.
he really didn't do it.
Yep.
And the 8 Men Out is about that gambling and all of that kind of stuff in the World Series. So it's really, really well done. Like a very well done kind of, I'm just older. But like there's a 12 Angry Men, like that kind of
Yes.
style of
Oof.
cinema.
Yes.
8 Men Out feels like that in a sports movie. And it's
Okay.
really well done. It's
Wow.
great.
We'll probably have to check that out because we originally had
It
12
was
Angry
on,
Men.
Yeah, it was on our list
Yeah.
for this season.
12 Angry Men's like one of my favorite.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's so good.
Yeah.
And just pure acting. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just,
Oh, yeah.
it's such, because there's not much they're just in a courtroom the whole time.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
really just in like a jury area. So
Right.
I think it's one of my favorite. I mean, it's just a great performance movie.
Yes.
But I think 8 Men Out, that should be on your list.
Nice.
I own it.
Okay.
So if you need to borrow it,
perfect.
of
Yeah,
course.
we'll just borrow it.
If you're worried about it, I've got it. But I would think those are probably I think that's probably my top 5. And then Moneyball would be right in there.
Okay.
So I think Moneyball might be the most like recent of those movies.
I think I was trying to think of other baseball movies that were more recent in terms of like real time events. Obviously, there's been more movies that have come out since then that are newer, but they've take place like in older, in older.
Million
era.
Dollar Arm that Disney did is pretty recent.
Okay,
that's a baseball movie. Yeah, and then there would be just some like baseball movies that maybe aren't as well known that would be in that category.
Yeah.
But I can't think of too many.
Yeah, because this all took place in 2001
and 2, I think.
2002 is the Oakland A's season that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That's crazy. I mean, it's at this point 23 years ago.
I know.
Which is crazy.
It makes me feel so old.
Really scary.
Because I remember, what's crazy is like I remember this season. Like I mean,
Really?
I like was watching, and now I'm like I'm at that age where my dad was like, I remember watching the, and I'm
Right.
like,
Yeah.
oh man, that's me. Because I mean, 2002 is my sophomore year in college, so I mean, I'm very much playing baseball at Taylor, watching as much baseball as I can, and I remember this Oakland Athletics team pretty well.
Wow.
That's crazy.
And so so it's not. It is long ago.
Yes.
And then I'd like to say it's not that long ago.
Well, not to make you feel older.
I know you were like 5.
I was 4. Okay. Emily was,
I was
2.
2.
Yeah, I know. Hey, I've been an old man since I was like 8 years old, and now my body's just actually catching
It's
up.
caught
Yeah,
up. Yeah.
It's becoming more true.
That's hilarious. I love it. Well, I think no better way to really get the conversation going than how would you rate this on a scale of 1 to 100?
I know. Yeah. And I feel like you guys always rate these. I feel like I'm just a harder grade. So just be prepared for that. Note
That is okay.
Note that I had Sandlot at 95, which is like my like almost favorite movie. So this movie can't surpass 95.
That's a great point of reference.
I have it at 92. So I really think it is like I think it is the best, maybe the best sports movie from a technical perspective that I'm aware of. It's certainly the best, like it's right up in that category baseball wise.
Yeah.
Like it's just so good from like cinematography, screenplay, acting, all of those things are just so good in this movie that I think is unusual in sports movies. This movie does well. The only reason I think it's not like next level is some of those other movies just have it's just a personal thing. Like they have a nostalgic factor.
Yep.
I do think some of those movies have a little bit more heart to it. This movie does a great job of, especially with Billy Beane and his daughter, of bringing in some heart and emotion. But that Oakland A's season, they won 20 games in a row, and that's incredible. But they still lost the first game of the series. So it's like it's not like when the Red Sox finally won the World Series and beat the Yankees and all of that kind of stuff. Like that was a massive historical moment. This has kind of faded away. So you don't have, like, I think of one of my favorite sports movies called Miracle. It's the story of the 1980 U.S. hockey team.
Wonderful.
That's one of the best sports moments in history.
Yeah.
That movie, you're just like, it's a little bit harder in this movie to do it. I think they do it as well as they can. But I think the story underneath this movie is not quite as compelling as maybe some of those others. So it's just a little bit lower down for me, but I love it.
Yeah. No, I think your rating is probably right on target with where I would cast my vote, and I'm guessing I would easily give it 90, 92.
Okay, great.
Which we've been changing up the way we record.
You're getting a little bit harder now, or is it?
We've been scoring a little bit differently.
Okay,
but then also we've stopped recording before we have guests in the studio.
Oh, okay.
So this is the first time we're talking about it. So we haven't cast our opinion or anything.
Okay.
I think it yields better conversation.
Yeah, I love that.
So this is all fresh.
Okay, well I'm excited now. I get to talk with you guys. You haven't talked about for 20 minutes before me all the good parts of the movie and stuff. That's great. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, we do have some trivia for you.
I know. I don't feel like I'm going to do as well as I did on the Sandlot one.
That's okay.
Okay.
I will say we had to work through some of these because we usually have there's a site that we go to that has like movie trivia.
Okay.
Some of them were pretty weak.
Okay. So you made them harder on me?
We did. Yes.
Oh, man. I should point out, I don't watch this movie quite as often.
Okay.
I just want to make all the qualifications I can when I do really poorly on this.
That's okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll kick it off. the film's budget didn't allow for filming at multiple ballparks. So they redressed the same stadium 8 times to look like it belonged to different teams. What stadium did they use?
Oh man, that's such a great, like, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Now I'm like thinking back to the movie. I'm like, oh, this is all that. I mean, did they? I don't know what stadium they would have used. I mean, did they use the Oakland A's stadium?
They did not.
Oh, that's what I was hoping for, because they did a great job to make it, especially on the inside scenes, because the Oakland A's stadium was very like kind of, not that pretty to look like.
Yeah.
Is it a California stadium?
It is.
Okay. Is it Dodger Stadium?
It is.
Okay, that's what I thought. That was my
Nice.
second guess.
Very nice.
But I was kind of hoping for the A stadium. But now, as I even think about, like, especially the outdoor scenes and when you see the field itself,
Yeah.
it does have, now I'm like, okay, I can see Dodger Stadium in different aspects
Yeah.
of that. So, yeah. The scene where they're unrolling the American flag, which is such a brief little scene.
Yep.
I think it's sometimes like on the movie poster and things like that.
Yeah.
I think it's such a beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
And the electric guitar
Yes.
playing kind of
Yes,
like
yes,
the
yes.
Hendrix version of
Yes.
it's so good.
Yes.
I love that little scene there too.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Hey, yeah, only the second try.
Yeah, I'll give myself a 0.5.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
That was
0.5
solid.
out of 1 is okay.
Honestly, like, I would give you the full point because I don't know anybody that would know that.
Okay, yeah. This is one of those few times when I'm coming in, I did not do like a bunch of research and stuff. I just was like, you know what? I've watched this movie. I'm going to dig in. I didn't have to do any research for Sandlot just because it's that familiar to
Yeah.
me. But this movie, like I said, there's probably some things I have to dig out of it.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right.
All right. Next question. What did Peter Brandt compare the team he and Billy were building using their model and analytics?
What did he compare the team to?
Yeah. Sorry. What did he compare it to? Yes.
Oh man. As soon as you're going to say it, I feel like I'm going to know it in that. No, I can't remember.
That's okay.
I don't have it. What is it?
The Island of Misfit
Toys. Yes, I remember that line now so well. Yep, yeah. And partly because that movie, like, because that's like I think it's a reference to
Rudolph.
Yes.
Yep.
And we just watched that movie not too long ago over Christmas. So
Nice.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. They are like an island of misfit toys. It's so good.
Yes. All right. This one I'm fairly confident you'll get.
No.
All right.
Unlikely.
What team did the Oakland A's defeat in order to break the record for most consecutive wins in the American League?
Was it the Rockies?
It was not.
I remember them beating the Rockies in there. Let's see, who'd they defeat? Is it in the movie, like that 20th win there?
Yep.
Okay, I've got to think back. Man, these are so good. I feel like even now I'm like, I should have watched this movie closer for those kinds of details.
It's the 11-11 game, if that helps. When they have the 11-0
Yes,
lead.
yeah. Oh, I remember the
Yeah,
20th game when
Yeah.
Hatteberg hits the home run.
Yep.
And I'm trying to think, like, I can even picture, for some reason I thought it was the Rockies coming back, but
You're on the right track with the letter.
Starts with an R.
it's not the Royals.
It is the
Is it
Royals. Kansas City
Really?
Royals.
Okay.
Yep.
Man, I do not remember that because I was trying to think of like some different scenes from the movie, guys who were pitching and stuff. Okay, the
Yeah.
Royals. Okay.
I was gonna, if you didn't get it, I was gonna say Bo Jackson. Then I knew you would have gotten it. Yeah.
But the R helped me out quite a bit.
Go.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the key metric Billy and Peter used to evaluate players?
Yeah, on base percentage.
Perfect.
Yeah, there we
Good
go.
job.
Very nice.
Well,
very nice.
now you're getting into. So I've actually read the book.
Oh, really?
I read the
okay.
book 5 or 6 years before I saw the movie. I mean, I read the book like shortly after it first came out. I mean, I actually love Michael Lewis. So I've read 2 or 3 of his books. And so Moneyball was a fantastic book. So even I know a little bit of sabermetrics, which is like the idea that the movie's based off of.
Okay.
Like I know some of that. So yeah, on base percentage. I remember they've actually even changed statistics now in baseball. Actually in almost every sport. In light of that, they have new statistics that they're measuring that they never measured before.
Oh, wow.
Because of
Nice.
some of this analytical research.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And honestly, like after watching the movie, I started thinking a lot about basketball.
Yes.
And I was like, man, like so many different moves make so much more sense now because they started looking at, okay, how many times is this guy going to the free throw line.
Yep.
You know, stuff like that.
Oh yeah, they have now I mean, really the NBA, every sport now,
Yeah.
but especially I think basketball and baseball is using analytics and things like that too. And they're using it even in different ways. Like now, like so many more teams in football go for it on fourth down.
Oh,
they've
yeah.
done the analytics. It
Yeah.
used to be you just did that when you felt it should be, you know, like, oh, this
Right.
feels right. We can get it. Now they're like, well, what's the percentage that we'll get it? And they've got all the analytics. I mean, it's crazy
Yeah.
what they're doing with stats now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It's cool to think about. Like Peter was talking to Billy and telling him like when he was given the example of the one guy, I can't think of his name for the life of me, but he shows him the video. He's like, he hit a home run and he didn't even know it.
Yes, it's one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal scene. But anyways, and like it's the same thing. Like he had no idea the impact. Like he changed not just baseball. He changed sports.
Yeah.
Period.
Massive. I mean, just what they did. And I mean, they get into it a little bit, but Theo Epstein is going to take Billy Bean's kind of understanding, and he is going to take the job at the Red Sox, and then the Red Sox are going to end up winning the World Series and that sort of thing, which I think they maybe give that in the kind of ending credits of the
Yes.
movie.
Yep.
I think 2 years later or something.
Yeah, it's crazy how significant those things are.
Yeah.
And you know, partly I wish it would have been a little bit more popular, because that would have been the kind of player I wasn't great, but I'm like, I got on base. Like I probably,
Right.
You wouldn't, if you looked at me, you would not be surprised that I didn't hit like a lot of home runs or like triple. I'm just not a big guy,
Sure.
but I walked and I got on base and I got singles and fought, you know, those sorts of things. And yeah, it just, nowadays those sorts of players mean a lot more, you know, in
Right,
some of that
yeah.
aspect. So yeah, it's cool to just think about that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, before our last question, I have a question too.
Okay.
And a follow up. You said you read the book.
Yeah.
I'm a big, like, if there's a movie that a book was like based off of, or I guess vice versa, I like have to read the book and watch the movie.
Yeah.
Do you like one more than the other, book versus
So here's
movie?
the thing. This is such an unusual situation where if you read the book, and you will not read the book, you should not
Yeah.
read the book.
Okay.
You would be amazed that they brought this movie out of it. Like that's one
Really?
of the things I'll bring. It is almost a purely like, I'm trying to even think what you would compare it to. It's almost just like it's just analysis. Like
Okay.
it has no storyline to it. There's no relationships in it. That whole like Billy Bean's background and all, none of that
Nothing.
is in the book. It is just stats. And now it's so compelling and it's
Right.
so interesting. The change of baseball, all of that, that's certainly there, but none of the like story, like what makes the movie have heart to it and the humor and all, none of that's there. So it is when they first were coming out with the movie, like me and 2 or 3 other buddies that had read the book, we were all like, how are they going to do this?
Yeah.
It's like going to be the worst movie ever.
Yeah.
It would be a great documentary, a terrible
Right,
movie.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
somehow they created a movie out of it. So if you are going into that thinking, if you read the book thinking, oh, this is going to have like heart and, you know, like a story and all of that, you would be very sad.
Disappointed.
yeah,
Yeah.
disappointed. Yeah. It's not that. So I think the book is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting book. I don't think most people probably will want to read it.
Okay. That makes sense.
If you're a huge baseball fan, you should.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Final question.
Okay.
I'm certain you will. I
Not
know
get this
you'll
one.
get half of it.
Okay.
Because it's kind of a two-parter.
Okay.
I think you'll get the second part, but I know for sure you'll get the first part.
I'll just try not to even get the first part and just lay all expectations to the left.
All right. So after the season ended, which team tried to hire Billy to implement his system?
Yeah. Boston Red Sox. That part I know.
There you go. Part 1 complete. And how much money did they offer him?
$12.5 million.
Very nice. Very
That
nice.
part, that's some of the more historical aspects that I think I know. I really should have probably known the Royals question on the end, but you know, I'll be like tossing and turning in my sleep.
Yes,
tonight. Just still frustrated with myself on that one. No,
I can't believe I didn't know that.
yeah, I should have gotten that one. The Royals. So yeah.
Oh my
That's so
goodness.
funny.
That's great. Well, hey, you still did really solid.
Well, thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
I appreciate it. I'm glad I didn't. I do feel like I finished strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
That's
yeah.
what
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah.
You just got to finish
Yeah.
strong.
We kept the easier ones for last. That
No,
way,
appreciate it.
you
Build my
can get
confidence.
boosted
Build your-
back
Yeah.
up.
The rest
Yeah.
of the rest of this interview time discussion won't be just me sulking
Right.
in the corner.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm going to kind of hand the baton off to you. What were some of your favorite scenes or things that you liked, disliked about the film? Just kind of open it up and let you talk about it.
Well, there's a lot that I liked about it, but I tried to narrow it down to not talk about it too much. I think I mentioned it earlier. Like, I think the acting is superb. Like, I think this is probably one of the best, well-acted movies, sports movies that I think you're probably going to watch. And honestly, it's one of those situations that you see every once in a while when you think they couldn't put that cast together today. Like Chris Pratt. Like he alone would be like $20 million, $30 million. You're not getting him in there, but I think Pitt is great. I do think he should have won the Oscar for this. I think Pitt deserves an Oscar. The person that won it, like, it was in a role that they didn't even speak. Like it's
what?
Yeah, it was. I remember when this happened and like this movie came out and the Oscars and everything and just being like, this is Pitt's chance. I think it is his best like acting performance. I think he should have won it. I think he got robbed there.
Wow.
And I just don't know that, Brad Pitt is going to have too many movies just because he's such a, he's just not an Oscar type of actor. And so I thought he did so well in this. So I think he's great. Like it's one of the few movies where I feel like I'm watching and I'm not thinking, well, that's Brad Pitt. Like it really does. He actually embodies kind of a different sort of character.
He does.
And it's really good. Like I thought his performance was great.
I think his performance was maybe what made the movie stand out to me. Honestly, because I really like Brad Pitt in general. Like having older brothers and kind of our age gap and everything, they were really into, Ocean's 11 and stuff. So like I liked what they liked, and so Brad Pitt, George Clooney, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith was big back in the day, and stuff like that. So he was kind of always floating around in kind of that guy sphere of what I like aspired to, So I've always appreciated him, but like, I thought he was phenomenal in this movie.
He's so good. It's just a really great performance, especially for a guy that I think like it's actually a little bit understated for, because he's a man's man. He's kind of like, I mean, that's who he's a star, and he really kind of tones himself down. And I think it's great, and I do think he carries the movie. I think it's one of the things. I think Jonah Hill though steals it. Like for me, like you take Jonah Hill out of this movie, and it's just the like fun and the humor and those sorts of. I mean, he was nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor.
Really?
I think this movie had like 5 or 6 or more nominations. Like it was actually for a sports movie, like a ton of critical acclaim.
That's awesome.
And so, I thought he was great. I think for probably if you're watching this for the first time, you've now seen Jonah Hill do some roles that are more serious.
Yes.
But when this movie came out, he had never done anything like that.
Right.
It's only just very goofy,
like
crazy,
raunchy comedy.
Correct. And so to see a guy like that I mean, he really is so funny, but it feels like he's not trying to be funny.
Yeah, it feels natural, understated. Yes.
And it's like warm-hearted. Like it's just a very lovable funny.
Yeah, it's sincere.
After seeing this movie, I did feel like out of all the Jonah Hill movies I've seen, this is my favorite role I've seen him in, I think.
By far, I think for me too. Like, and I don't know that I've seen a ton of Jonah Hill movies, but he's just, it's like, you just have to love him. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's not a scene that he's in where I don't think I have like some smile, just a little bit of like a grin on my face, because he's just funny. And like, I just think it's so good. So I thought his performance was excellent.
Yes, I would agree. And to that end, not that I'm necessarily like recommending this movie, but talk about stealing the show. War Dogs.
Okay.
Jonah Hill. He was phenomenal in that movie.
Is that Channing Tatum too, or who's the other guy that's in
Miles Teller?
Miles Teller. Okay, oh, that's right. Who's also in Maverick?
Yes, Top Gun Maverick.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're the two leads of the movie.
Okay,
and I mean, it's a really good movie based on a true story.
Okay,
about gun runners during the Afghanistan.
And Jonah Hill's
war.
good in it.
Yeah. Oh, he steals the show.
Okay,
like he's very much like, he's kind of like. It's not an intentionally comedic role, but like his character is like, this guy's out of left field. Like,
Okay.
what is going on
Yeah,
here?
yeah, yeah.
Like,
Well, I feel like that's how he does in this role too. I don't think
Yeah.
it's, I mean, it's certainly from the actual Paul DePodesta is not like it's based off of.
Okay.
Is who's an actual like played baseball, is works still today in baseball.
Yeah.
in this sort of area. It was like Billy Bean's right hand man. It's kind of who this character is based off of.
Okay.
And but that guy's just like a serious kind of, I mean,
Yeah.
Jonah Hill just makes this I just think a great, like just so fun and enjoyable. Every
Yeah.
scene he's in is probably on my list of favorite scenes or close.
Nice.
And so, yeah, I think he's great. Philip Seymour Hoffman's like, I already mentioned Twister, which is like one of my favorite movies. I talked to you guys beforehand about him or about that movie. I think he's great.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
Again, how he is playing Art Howe in this movie is like, how did you get Philip Seymour Hoffman to play this role?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's so good. Like he's
fantastic.
Such a curmudgeon, like,
Yep.
and just such a baseball coach. And you like, what I love about Hoffman in particular, like you don't like Art Howe because he is sort of the like villain of the film in some
Right.
ways.
Yeah, yeah.
But you kind of do because it's Phil. He brings some like warmth to that role and
Yes.
some of that with the curmudgeon that I'm just like, it's just a really good performance.
Yes.
And a very minor role.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That I
Yep.
thought was great.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned Chris Pratt. I mean, the 2 or 3 scenes
Yes.
he's in are just so funny and
Yes.
again, understated and just really well done.
Yes.
This is like during Parks and Rec when this comes out. So this is why
Right.
they can get him on a movie like this. But then even I mentioned some other roles. Like I think the head scout who is such a jerk, but
Yeah.
like
Yes.
it's still a great performance for
Oh,
a
yeah.
scout. So Ron Washington is the like coach, the infielders coach that teaches Hatterberg how to play first.
yes,
And he has
yes,
those
yes.
lines of like where Billy Bean's like, oh, it's easy. Anybody can learn it. And he goes over and Ron just very deadpan in
Yeah.
this movie. The actors
Yeah.
like, no, it's incredibly hard.
Yes. Yeah. I bust out laughing
Yeah.
when he said that.
So good. That
Yes.
actor. So Ron Washington ended up coaching for the Braves. He like I love Ron Washington. That's obviously this is an actor playing his role, but it's
Right,
just
right.
kind of a fun for me. I'm like, oh man, that's so good. Cause Ron Washington's probably one of the best infield coaches, maybe. I mean, certainly of the last generation. I mean, he
Really?
is incredible
Okay.
as an infielder's coach. And so it's just fun to see him in a movie like this. And I thought the actor did so well. Like just a couple.
That's awesome.
So even those kind of like, I thought the daughter is actually really great.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In
Yes.
the movie and gives you that heart to it. I think the stepdad is ridiculous
Yeah.
in
Yes.
every right way possible. Like
Yes.
the conversation where he's like, but I mean, if you don't think we should have given a fuck, it's just such a like,
Yes.
with a Brad Pitt sort of like star baseball athlete, and this kind of like feels a little bit like a West Coast elite hippie,
Yeah.
money, tons of the house is just unbelievable,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is so good. Like it's just,
Yes.
and he does it well. So I thought the acting was, I mean, for me, probably what makes the movie so well done.
Yeah.
Is just every performance is really good, and that's so unusual for a sports movie.
Yeah.
It really is. And honestly, like, I'm surprised. I mean, I'm not surprised on one hand, but like sports movies typically don't get Oscar nominations.
Right.
They generally don't.
Yeah.
And so I had no idea that they had so many, especially because like when I watched it, and maybe this is a newer thing, but I didn't feel like it was Oscar baity.
Yeah,
like
it's not. Yeah,
there are so many movies that come out today and it's like, okay, that's Oscar bait. They're releasing it during award season. They're trying to get Oscars.
Yep.
But it really didn't feel like that, and it definitely deserves it.
yeah. It's just a reminder, I think, in part, and maybe this is my own point of view, and you guys could push back, and I'd be happy to hear that I think. And I think the Oscars are maybe even trying to do a little bit better, but for a long time, the Oscars has been putting out movies that nobody actually enjoys.
That's
Yeah.
very true.
And they're like, so I think this is hearkening back to like, it used to not be that way. Like, I
Yeah.
think you watch this movie and you're like, oh, I really enjoy it. Probably didn't get nominated for anything. Cause
Right.
it's not like edgy, and it's not like a super sad story, or things like that. It's just a really good,
Yeah.
interesting, like well acted, just good movie. And I think a lot of times we're like, well, that means it probably won't get nominated for things. And I think that's so
Right.
sad.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. And like I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like for a while, it was like, oh well, they didn't do anything that was outside of the norm,
Right.
so we shouldn't nominate them.
Yeah. And I think that's why he ended up actually not winning the Oscars, because the other who won Best Actor was a very unique, different kind of role.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just think this is better. Like
Yeah.
and I do think there is some, I do think you don't want to like necessarily keep in mind all of this actor's performances and stuff like that. But I also think there's sometimes like, that's okay too. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes you give, Denzel wins an Oscar, and the role he won an Oscar for, he's incredible. But when you consider all the work he's done too, part of that is playing into that. I just
Yes.
think like an actor like Brad Pitt, I just think, oh man, he probably should have an Oscar.
Yeah.
Like he
I
really
agree.
is like one of the most well-known
Oh yeah.
actors of my generation would be.
Yep.
That he is the star.
Yeah.
And he doesn't.
Yeah.
He's not probably going to win one.
Yeah, like I don't know that he has that many more left in the tank.
Right.
And I mean, to his credit, the last couple movies he's done have done extremely well.
Yep.
I haven't watched Bullet Train, but that did like phenomenal.
Okay.
I haven't watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but that also did really well, and he was the leading man in both of those.
Okay.
I don't think they got any Oscar nominations or any. Maybe they did.
Yeah.
But I don't really know how much is left.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's always the, you just you're like, oh, there's just certain opportunities.
Right.
And he got nominated and that sort of thing. So I think he should have won that. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's the acting, like you just don't, most sports movies, like I think of like a Remember the Titans,
Yeah.
right? You have Denzel and like but that's it. Like, I mean, a lot of other
Yeah.
actors will have come out of that, but and here you have, and I didn't even mention, I mean, there's like his ex-wife is actually a really famous actress. The guy who does play the stepdad is a pretty famous
Yeah.
actor now. Like there is just so much talent in this
Yeah.
movie for
Oh,
a
yeah.
sports movie. So I thought that's great. I think I've told you guys this before. I love Aaron Sorkin, who wrote the screenplay.
Yeah.
So maybe my favorite writer. So
Yeah,
Aaron
yeah.
Sorkin wrote two of my favorite TV shows, Sports Night, which is like a half hour comedy of like behind like a third-rated ESPN. Like
Oh,
is what
nice.
it is.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
so good. And then West Wing. I think West Wing is
Yeah.
maybe one of the best shows of all time.
Nice. Okay.
He writes it. He's such a great writer. And then movies, A Few Good Men. He
Yeah.
wrote,
Yep.
which is I just actually saw that on TV the other day. It's
Yeah.
still so good. Like if it comes on, I'm probably gonna watch it. And then The American President, which is probably too.
I don't think
like
I've seen
you guys
that.
are too
Yeah.
young
Yeah,
for
I
that.
haven't seen that.
It's an older movie, but it's really really well done, and just it's a great kind of like classic rom-com, but
Yeah.
like actually like well done and good and funny. And then Social Network.
Oh,
he
yeah,
wrote
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I think all of those are great movies. So he's like one of my favorite. I think the dialogue in this movie, again, why this movie is so good is there's almost no cheesiness. Like nothing
Oh, I wouldn't-
feels
no.
corny. Like sports movies are just filled with
Yep.
some corny, like you're just like, oh, and everything in this movie is witty and thoughtful and
Yep.
funny and like interesting. Like it's just, I just think he's, like I said, he's one of my favorite writers. And if you were to read the book and then consider they made a movie off of this, I think you would be like, how did he ever do this? Like the book has no dialogue, no relationships, none of those things. I mean, it's just incredible
Yeah.
that they did that. So I think that's great. There's a couple like kind of minor things that I love about it too. Like I think I mentioned beforehand, like it's so rewatchable.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Like, I just can't imagine a mood that you would be in where you're like, yeah, I could watch this. Like you just,
Right, yeah.
You're just always going to be, I guess, a mood that you would be in where you would be like, I couldn't watch this.
Yeah.
It's just always like, oh yeah, this is good. I'm going to enjoy it.
Yes.
It's interesting. It's warm. It's lighthearted. It's funny. It's genuinely entertaining. Like, I just think this is such a rewatchable movie. I love buddy movies. And this
Yes.
is a really great buddy movie.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Because I do think one of the reasons we can talk about Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill is because of them together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have that kind of odd couple, you know,
Yes.
Brad Pitt, athlete, like
Right.
tough, intense, Jonah Hill, Yale,
Right. Yeah.
the epitome of non-athlete, like
Yes. Yeah.
nerdy, dorky,
Yeah.
not confident, all of that kind of stuff. And they're like together.
Yes.
It's so good.
I think one of the best scenes, like every scene that they're together in is fantastic. But one of my favorite scenes is actually very early on, when Billy first brings him to the meeting.
Yeah.
And he, snaps and points at him, and he's like, on base percentage, like that scene is phenomenal because their chemistry it's perfect.
Yeah.
They execute their roles exactly how you would expect them to. His Pete is his character's name.
Yes.
Jonah Hill.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Pete is
Pete
in
Brand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He's in an environment that like he would very clearly feel uncomfortable in.
Yes. Yeah.
And like, if things couldn't be worse, it gets worse when he's like, does he really need to be here?
Yes.
The head scout.
Right. Yeah.
So then you feel even worse.
Yeah.
It's like, so it's perfectly awkward. And Brad Pitt, Billy, is so confident and done with the way things have been done.
Yeah.
He's so over it.
Yeah.
He does not care.
Yeah.
And it's just, I love that scene.
It's a great scene. It's on my list of favorite scenes, and like,
Yeah.
and some of it's just the snapping, like just this little,
Yeah.
Brad Pitt just thinks he's gonna react to this snap,
Yes.
Yeah.
and Jonah's like, do you want me to say, like, you want me to say, and he's like,
Yeah.
every time I point to you,
Yeah.
that's what I'm, and then he has that one line in there too where he's like, guys, don't make me point to,
Don't
and
make
it's
me
like,
point again.
yeah, and I just think, so I think the two of those together, I love like a good like buddy cop film or a buddy cop show, like
Yeah.
those sorts of things. I think this is actually like a really good kind of like odd couple friendship sort of movie that leads along to. So I think that part, I love that aspect of it. And then there's a couple, like every sports movie has to have like a chill scene, like a scene that like kind of gets you on the edge of the seat. Like the chill bumps kind of like pop up where you're like, and they make that 20 game run such a great job. That
Yes.
11-11 coming back from being up 11-0, and then the Hatterberg home run, like,
Yeah.
is
my God.
such a great scene. Even the like, the Billy Bean's in the like locker room and he hears the bat essentially, and they all look up at the same time with the crack, which is such a baseball thing because you can hear when a really like a ball is hit, and so when you hear that, and then I love it too. Just a little insight, like when he's going home, they go back to the original footage. So
Yeah,
they
I
flash
noticed that.
back
Yes.
to the actual footage, and they go back and forth between Chris Pratt and the actual Scott Hatterberg, and it's like, it looks really real
It
and
does.
good. And for
Yes.
a guy who saw that live, like I remember watching
Yeah.
that game, it's like, oh man, that really does connect. I think that scene's so great. Like that is, because it's really partly this movie doesn't have a ton of sports in it because the book is really not a ton of sport. Like there's not a ton of like guys playing baseball, you know, these sorts of things. It's kind of a behind the scenes sports movie because it's about a GM and strategies and stuff. So, but if you're going to be a sports movie, you have to have some like really good sports scenes.
Yeah.
And I think that one was just so well done.
That's awesome.
So that's probably my last, like just big like, is that they got the most important like sports scene right. And I think they got it perfect.
I agree 100%. That was actually one of the things that came to my mind when I was thinking about scenes that I really liked. That scene specifically, but even like overall for anytime the A's were on the field and they were kind of letting you sit in the game longer than just to show that they lost.
Yep.
Any of the scenes where you were in the game for a little bit, one of the things that I loved that they did was, as you know, baseball games can take a long time sometimes.
Right. Yep.
And so, the day can turn into night. It's dark out when you leave and so on and so forth. But their use of that was like, as the game got serious or more intense, like the light just disappeared.
Yeah.
I thought that was super cool.
I didn't even think about that. You're right. Like some of the cinematography of the games and moments and stuff like that is really strong.
Yeah, it's like the more dramatic scenes of the game, it just like it focuses you in as the audience. It gets real serious and the light disappears. But then in the real world of the game, like when the game is over, it's usually night out.
Right.
But it started with the sun.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, it kind of plays into both, but they utilized it in a way to story tell drama effectively.
Well, and what you mentioned in the trivia question too, like the fact that they make this stadium look like a bunch of different
right.
Like it really is a beautiful movie, especially if you're a baseball guy. Like there are a few things for a baseball guy. Like even my boys we went to Fenway, this past year, and like you just walk into a baseball stadium, and I mean every little boy's like eyes and hearts and adult boy eyes and heart, they just get big. You're just like, oh man, and this movie does some great, like, there's just really great like footage of baseball stadiums and like night games. And like I mentioned before, the day game with the national anthem and all that, like just that makes you feel baseball. And I think you have to do that because it's not a ton of like the stars of the movie actually aren't on the field.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's not a sports movie in that way. So sports are kind of the backdrop, and they do such a good job of using that in a really compelling way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's one of the things that like, I think baseball especially is kind of a romantic sport.
Well, Billy Beane says that.
Yeah. He's like, it's hard not to romanticize baseball, but like, it's so true that it's like, it's beautiful. There's a certain form of poetry that's there.
Yeah.
And, we're Cubs fans.
Yeah.
And so my brother, his father-in-law, diehard Cubs fan.
Yeah.
He said every time he goes to Wrigley, he cries.
Oh, yeah.
When he walks into the stadium.
Yep.
And like you've been to Wrigley. I have not. I want to go, and eventually we will. But like, I've been to other stadiums, and it's you walk in and it's overwhelming.
It's so great. Yeah.
Yes.
I think a lot of stadiums are that way. Wrigley, I mean, when you get a chance to go like Wrigley and Fenway are different. Like not only are you like, but you also feel like you're walking back into 50, 60 years ago.
It's so well preserved.
It's such a cool state. We went I had not been forever. And then we went I don't think it was this past summer, but the summer before. So about a year and a half ago. And I mean, Carson still talks about it. And even when we went to Fenway, he was like, Dad, do you think Fenway's better than Wrigley, or do you think Wrigley's better? I kind of like this about Fenway, but I like this about Wrigley and all that. It's just so cool, like great. Dissecting those things. And I'm like, dude, I don't know which one. I mean, they're both just such great stadiums. So yeah, I think there's just something to that. There is something romantic about baseball, and I think this movie hits it really well. Dislikes, I don't have before, and then I've got a list of favorite scenes. Okay. I don't really have a ton of dislikes. Every sports movie has some things that if you're a sports fan, especially if you've played a sport, that you're just like, that's just not realistic. Like it's just not. And there are like some of those things, like that 11th game. They make some errors in that movie, and it literally looks like the guy, like the ball goes in his glove, and he legitimately just drops it on purpose. And I'm like, that doesn't look like an error that any professional baseball player would ever make in real life. So there's some of those things that you're just always going to get. But for the most part, like Chris Pratt did a great job. Like his swing actually looked like Hatterberg's, and some of that, like you can see some of those things. But there's a few about that. I do think they're playing up the movie like what the movie's about more so than like you would watch that movie and you'd be like, oh, the A's won 20 games because of David Justice and Scott Hatterberg and you know Chad Bradford and these guys. And it's like actually Barry Zito was 23-5 and won the Cy Young that year, and they don't even mention his name in the movie. Tim Hudson is like unbelievable. I don't know if he's a Hall of Famer, but he's close. Mark Mulder was incredible that season. Chavez, Tejada. Like there's all of these players that were all-stars on that Oakland A's team that aren't in the film at all, really. And you're like, Tim Hudson gets a couple little, not like Huddy makes a couple little names to him. But for the most part, it's so it just is like, I get what they're doing. They're right. The premise of the movie is this metrics and some of that. And it's true. Like their team salary was so low, but I think they're, some of it's just like, if you're a sports fan, you're like, well, yes, Scott Hatterberg's home run was great, but also they had the best like pitching rotation in baseball that year.
Yeah. Okay.
And none of those guys are hardly mentioned at all.
Yeah.
So there's a few of that just, when you watch those sorts of, the scene, which is so great, it's one of my favorite scenes, is when Pete and Billy first meet, and he kind of like picks him out of the office cubicle, and then they go outside, and Pete's just scared to death, and Billy's like, why was he listening to you? All of that kind of, it's just such a great scene. But there's no way Billy Beane is he's flying out to Cleveland from Oakland to sit in another GM's office. Mark Shapiro, I think is who it was.
Yes.
And he's like, oh, so, and they have like no point. He's like, oh, so this guy's not on the table. Like, it just feels in the moment, I'm like, that meeting just feels so like unrealistic in like the sense of like, that's just probably never going to happen.
Right.
So there's a few of those things that I think like, but you're going to have that in, I think I've mentioned before, Field of Dreams, one of my favorite baseball movies. The guy who plays Shoeless Joe has the worst baseball swing I've ever seen. And so there's always going to be some of that in there. But those are really small and those little things. So there's a couple moments where as a baseball guy, you just have to like suspend your disbelief. You have to kind of be like, okay, let's imagine that this actually did happen. It wouldn't probably happen this way. But those are such small things. I don't really have many dislikes. I mean, the movie for me is just, I just think it's a joy from start to finish.
Yeah.
Did you guys have many things that you didn't like, or things that were in the film like that?
I'll let you go first.
Not really anything comes to mind. Like we were talking about before, I feel like I'm very like hypersensitive to like cheesiness in movies. And it just takes me out of it. And I was really thankful that there really wasn't, at least that I can think of right now, a single time where I was like, oh, that kind of was a little corny.
Yeah.
But I don't think there was anything that I disliked. But
there's not anything specific that I would say like, man, like, I hate that they did this or whatever. The one thing that I kind of was left with after the movie was over that I was kind of thinking about was that I really loved Chris Pratt as Scott Hatterberg.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a little nitpicky, but it felt like the movie was kind of setting his character up to be really big.
Yeah.
As the scene where they go and visit his house. I mean, I love it because of the comedy and everything, but it felt like it's like, oh, this is like a big deal because this is the only player's house that they went to.
Yeah.
And not to say that he wasn't, because he had that big moment where
Right.
he hit the home run and everything, but it was also just kind of like, oh, this is just progressing the story.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with Scott. Like,
Right.
It does, but not really.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes, I do think that's the hard part of this not having an actual story behind it. Like, that's
Yes.
the part of this movie that I think is a little bit difficult, is there's not this really compelling story. The compelling story is stats.
Yeah.
And like stats
Yeah.
change that sort of thing. And they have to kind of like, the stats are the star. And so they have to create the story that can carry that through an entire movie, because nobody's watching a movie about stats. There's got to be heart and story. So you got to have this like likable Chris Pratt kind of character for, honestly, Emily, for you to watch it, if, people, my wife and, just in general, non-massive baseball stat people behind it, like, there's got to be like a story. I mean, honestly, even for me to watch, like anybody to watch it, there's got to be a story and something. And I think because Scott Hatterberg actually is not that great. Like like he was a fine kind of baseball player and that sort of thing, but they had to kind of, I think, lean into that to give it some depth and, even just some fun and give you people to care about.
Yeah.
Outside of just Billy Beane. So
Yeah.
That's true. But I think you're right. I mean, I do think that's why this movie for me is not like an all-time sports film, because the sports aspect of it isn't as like the story behind that's maybe not as compelling as some others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other? I mean, I thought the movie at times too. I think it can be a little bit slow. I mean, there is some there's enough. The acting's good enough. The screenplay, but it does. And like I said, I love that. But I'm like thinking eventually. Even Carson, when I was coming over, he's like, "Hey, Dad, can I watch that movie?" I'm like, "Not yet." But one day, yes. And but part of me is like if he watched it now, I just think he'd be bored.
Yeah.
You know, in some of that. It's a pretty slow movie, especially for sports movies that are normally very like on the edge of your seat. Like, what's going to happen next? What's going on? There's all this tension.
Yeah.
Not as much tension, you know, and so it's very subdued.
Yeah.
So I think that would be, you know, I could see some people being like, I need more action, excitement, etc. Favorite scenes. I mentioned the first scene with Pitt and Hill that I think is so great.
Yes.
I love the other, probably my favorite scene maybe, and certainly the scene with Pitt and Hill is where they're negotiating for Rincon, and this is people listening to the podcast, they won't see it, but when Jonah Hill does the like very elongated fist kind of pump. I don't even know what it is. Only he could do it. But this whole like, you know, kind of, if this was a video, it'd just be great, guys. I'm nailing it. But it's so, that scene is so funny.
It is
so good.
Yeah. Well, it encapsulates his character. Right. Because he's like, he's laser focused. He knows what he's doing. So, you know, he knows that he should be celebrating. But like, he's so awkward.
Everything is so,
Yes. And it's like, he has to do the same thing that Billy just did because Billy did that just a minute ago. So he does it, but it's like, it could not be more uncomfortable and funny. And yes.
It's so good. And that whole scene, I think, what Aaron Sorkin has made kind of like a living off of is scenes like that, where you're kind of like, you don't get to see those things. That's what like fans are like, I wonder what it would be like to have a GM. And he's like, Pitt's got one guy on the line, and then he's getting his owner on the line to try to get more money. And then he's like, and then I want you to buy my players Coca-Cola, like soda from the pop machine. And then I want to, you know, all of these kinds of things. And like, all of the different phone calls, it's like, it's like this back room. It's exciting, you know, for an off the scene. I just think that scene's great. Like it's so entertaining. And then the little fist pump that he does is the best thing. It's the part of the movie that I probably most remember is Jonah Hill's little fist pump is so good. I've already mentioned too, Hatterberg's home run is a perfect scene.
Phenomenal.
The flashbacks, how close it looked to the original, the bat pop, like all of that is so good. I think I've mentioned a lot. I think the scene you mentioned, the scene with Hatterberg's family, I do think is so like it's just such a, you know, he gets the phone call and he's like, "You want to let us in?" He's like, "What? What do you mean?" Like we're outside, and then, you know, obviously I've talked before, like the third base coach is such a funny like character in that scene too. And every scene, and then I think Hatterberg too. He probably has my favorite line. Where David Justice, who ended up being an Atlanta Brave, who I love, they're like eating cereal in the locker room. And he's like, you know, what are you most afraid of or whatever? And he says that a ball would be hit in my general direction. And David Justice sort of laughs, so like kind of chuckles, and he's like, "No, really." And then Chris Pratt's like, "No, really." Like that literally is my greatest. It's such a Chris Pratt scene too, before Chris Pratt was Chris Pratt. And it's just so good. I think that's so funny. I loved when his daughter sings the song to him in the rec. I mean, that gives you, I think that relationship really is the heart of it. That makes you care about Billy Beane in a deeper way.
Oh, for sure. And I love that, like, on the flip side of that, because like that's a scene where it's really developing the relationship, and it's this special moment for a father specifically. You know, he gets to hear his little girl sing. It's like, that's so special for him. But then like you have kind of the inverse in a lot of other scenes where she's worried about him. Like just being so sweet, like, "Dad, are you going to lose your job? You know, don't worry about me. Get on your plane," you know, and everything. But that relationship really does round out Billy. and the most. I think it's what was necessary.
Oh, and honestly, it brings, the movie ends with him listening to, he puts in this like burnt CD, which again comes back to my 2002 world.
Yeah.
You guys remember that? But I used to burn CDs for Steph when we were dating. So I very much remember burning CDs, but he puts in the little of her song. And that song, I think, partly what they're trying to tell you is that he doesn't go to Boston for $12.5 million because he wants to stay near his daughter. And that holds that film together and his character together in a way that I think you really need. And I think that her scene, she actually does a great job. Like, it's a very just believable scene. I feel like even musically and all that kind of stuff where it's just sweet. Like, she's not like this unbelievable performance and all that. It's just a sweet, it's just, I just think it's a great scene. And the daughter does really well there. So I love that where she sings to him. And then I mentioned before too, let me give a funny scene that I think is also really good. And then I'll give one more serious one. But the scene with the scouts pretty early on in the movie where they're all talking about, and he said, there's a couple lines in there where he's like, well, he's got an ugly girlfriend. And it's like, it's so ridiculous. And it's like, but that is how scouts used to think in some ways. It's played up. It's exaggerated for sure. But I grew up in that era of baseball and that sort of thing. And I just remember he's got confidence, or he probably lacks confidence because he hasn't, those sorts of things. And then there's this one guy who's talking about just how sweet his swing is every time it hits the, that sort of thing. And then I think Pitt comes in the middle of the scene, if I'm remembering rightly. And he's like, well, he hit 190 last year, and and there's this statement where he says, let me see, if he's so good, why doesn't he hit good? And it's like all these guys are talking about looks and swing and power and girlfriend, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's his stats are terrible. He actually can't do that. And I just think that's so true in life, even I'm in ministry, but even sometimes it's this guy maybe has tons of charisma and he speaks really well and he has all of this confidence and that sort of thing. But he actually doesn't, he's not a pass. He doesn't have the real stuff. And I think you just, almost any job, any field, people can go, there are people who look good. And probably you go, oh, I bet you they're amazing. And they're actually not, they can't actually do that. And sometimes the whole point of the movie is misfit toy. Sometimes it's people who you would look at and go, well, he can't be a good baseball player. Right. Actually, he's great. Because he can actually do this. My favorite baseball player, maybe of all time, is Tony Gwynn. And Tony Gwynn is probably one of the best hitters in baseball of all time. And towards the end of his career, he's pretty overweight and he was pretty out of shape, and but he just hit a baseball so well. And sometimes people would probably not be super, even today, he doesn't get a ton of press. He's passed away, but he's a Hall of Famer. He probably doesn't get as much press as he should. Yeah. Because he wasn't big and so I just think, but that scout scene makes me laugh so hard when those guys are just in there talking about the Fabio and all of these kinds of things. Do you even know who Fabio is?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you?
I don't think I know.
Okay. Everybody's looking at me who's Fabio? Fabio is this male model with really long hair that if you were to talk about, I don't even know who would be today, but if you were to talk about a beautiful man, kind of this sort of idea, it would have been Fabio back in the day. Yeah. But they're just making all of these and I actually think one of the old guys doesn't know. I think he says Fabio.
Yeah, he's who's Fabio?
Yeah. It's so good. But that whole scene, you're in that scene. You're these guys are so out of touch.
Oh yeah,
and I think it's great. Yes. And then probably the last scene that I'll mention is just the end with the metaphor clip. He has this guy who,
oh my gosh,
so crushes the ball, runs to first, trips over first base as he's trying to get to second as he possibly can, goes back to first base, scrambles back. And then everybody's no, the ball went over the fence. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then Jonah Hills is he hit a home run and he didn't know it. Mm-hmm. And the point is Billy Beane, that's what you've done. Don't miss what's happening. I just think that's, again, a really great sort of just what a great like we so easily miss the home run. We just don't sometimes see the things that are so good and and glorious and those sorts of things.
Yes.
We're just so often focused on other things. I just think it's a great point. And was super, like, just even as I watched it again this time, that probably stuck out to me. Maybe it's just I'm getting older and watching the movie a lot of times. I'm like, oh man, that is powerful. That's a really thoughtful idea.
It really is. And I especially appreciate it just because, like you were saying, I feel like it's really true of just life in general. Too often, like, we as humans, and I think especially Christians, get discouraged because we can be so focused on maybe the wrong things. Yeah. You know, like, oh man, I really wish I converted that person or whatever. And we lose sight of the fact that you just had like a 45-minute conversation about God with somebody. Yeah. Like, that's amazing. Yeah. It's not your job to convert them. Right. You know, you're just here to love. Yeah. And
well, it's such a great picture of just like friendship too. Like one of the things I try to talk about even for our church a lot is I think sometimes we as Christians can be really focused on sin. And I think there's a helpfulness into just seeing like, oh man, my brother's struggling over here. I want to help him. I see some maybe sin in his life or those sorts of things. Like, you ought to love someone enough to do that. But I try to say often in our church, like, I want us to be like grace hunters. Like, I want us to be like, hey, but do you see what God's doing? Do you see the grace? And do you see those sorts of things and pointing those things out? And I think in a very different way, like, that's what, like, here's Brad Pitt just so like, you know, failed again. They didn't win, like all of this kind of stuff down. And Jonah Hill's like, no, you're missing the real win. Like, and the more important. And I think we get to do that for each other as like brothers and sisters in Christ, as friends, that sort of thing. Yes. That's really like just a really great thing to be able to be like, hey man, I know that all you can see is this right here. But can I tell you what I see? Like, here's the home run that God probably hit, you know, realistically in your life. But see that and keep your eyes on that. And like, I just think it's great. There's so many ways that as I was watching that I was just like, oh man, it's such an encouraging scene. And why I think honestly, that friendship buddy relationship, those sorts of things are what uphold movies like this. Because that we can take and go, I think you even watch that movie like, man, I've got a friend like that, or relationships like those things matter. And those are what uphold us in the most difficult times. I can't think of how many times Jonah Hill upholds Billy Beane in this movie as the young kind of weak, whatever, just kind of keeps him there and vice versa. So I think it's a great, great movie. I think there's a lot to it that you just don't normally see in a sports movie.
Yeah. I think it nails, like, we've kind of talked about this already, but it kind of nails like the mundane aspects of just day-to-day work. Yep. But makes them like generally most people eventually find a job that they like. So like even the mundane things, like you can enjoy that. Yeah. And there are funny things that happen and whatever. So like good example, another one of my favorite scenes when Billy and Pete go into Art's office. Yeah. Yes. And they basically trade Jimmy in front of him and tell him, hey, you can't play Pena tonight and whatever. Like that whole sequence is great because they're just doing business. Right. Mm-hmm. But also like maybe this is another testament to Jonah, but like the end of that sequence, he's just like, Art, did you want the door closed? Or, you know, it's just like a little tiny nugget that's so funny, but like, that's how real life is too, you know? Like,
well, and even before that, there's a quote right before that I think is also really powerful too. Like Art he points to Jonah Hill's character and is like, do you really buy all this stuff? And he's like 100%. Mm-hmm. Yes. It's just one of those like, hey, this guy, like I'm his guy and I am his guy. It's just one of those things where you're like, it's just like there's just aspects of that. I do think you're right though. I think what Sorkin's really good at in this movie, and this movie brings out a little bit of why I think a lot of people loved Parks and Rec and The Office and that sort of thing. Yeah. It does just feel very normal. Like a lot of sports movies are like, well, I'm never going to get to do this. I'm never going to be in this situation. Yes. This movie is like, oh yeah, I know that guy. Like I actually work with a guy just like that. Or I like know this. Right. Like even Chris Pratt's Scotty Hatteberg character, which I think is one of the reasons I like that, feels not like your typical pro athlete. Mm-hmm. He kind of has this fear. He's got this almost like just kind of youthful. Like he just feels like a normal person, kind of like you feel, in your job on the first day, or when you're going through things or asked to do something. Like there's just some relatability, some awkwardness. Like there's a lot of awkward humor in this movie where they look each other. Even the last scene, which I remembered today, when not the last scene, but second to last, where when he's meeting with the Boston owner and that sort of thing. The guy's talking about like, what should I buy my wife?
Yeah, for her birthday.
And he's like, get her a scarf, and he's like, what's that? That sort of thing. And he's like, hey man, we just lost this one. And I'm just like, that's such a funny, like awkward, weird scene. That again just feels very real, and helps out. So there's just a lot in this movie that I think is really good.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Em, did you have any closing thoughts that you want to leave us with or ask Jeff?
No, I think we covered it.
Okay, I do not have anything else.
I'm out, man. I feel like I've already, like, most people are gonna be like, this Moneyball podcast was how long? And then I feel like what they're gonna start to say is go, oh yeah, we know when Jeff's on the podcast, that link gets a little longer. Though you had a part 1 and part 2. I haven't made you do a part 1 and part 2 yet.
You have not.
No. We did. Yeah, the Batman was part 1, part 2. I would say mostly because of me.
Okay.
Because I'm such a big superhero nerd.
Okay. Not Cole's fault.
Not Cole's fault.
Okay.
But I will say Cole should have a podcast.
Okay.
He was such a good, like, I felt like he was interviewing us the whole time. He was so good.
Oh, that's great.
So good.
Yeah. I think I think we've done this movie justice as far as I'm concerned. So.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's great.
I love it. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us again.
Yes.
It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, there's few things to talk with friends that are more enjoyable. And then to talk about sports movies with friends just feels like the cherry on top of the ice cream cone for me. So this is great.
Yes. I love it. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, of course, man.
All right. Well, thank you again, Jeff, for coming into the studio to record with us.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff. We had a blast, and it was a great time talking about this movie with you.
Yes. And thank you all for tuning in and listening through. Next week, we are going to be covering Toy Story 3, which we are super excited about.
Toy Story 3, such a good movie.
It is.
Maybe, probably, undoubtedly, the best Toy Story.
I think I agree with that.
Yes.
I don't know for sure, but I think I might.
Well, if you want to find out if she does or does not agree with me, come back next week and tune in to our episode where we're going to talk about it and dig in deep to all things Toy Story 3.
Yes.
And probably things Toy Story 1, 2, and 4. And why not talk about them to
Which
compare?
Toy Story 4, 2 thumbs down from me.
Hey, we'll talk about that next week. We'll talk about that next
week.
week.
Well, anyways, Toy Story 3 is streaming on Disney Plus, and if you haven't seen it or just want to watch it as a refresher, obviously, feel free to watch it beforehand. But we are very excited to cover that next week, and we will see you then.
All right, be safe. We love you guys.
Bye.
Bye.